Alright, the cinematic portrayals of Robin Hood here. I went to the local library to get some DVDs here to figure out the story of Robin Hood going on here. This is a placeholder right now because this is my book of figuring out the the lore that we have here, but we'll go ahead and insert a picture here. There we go. So the one that I couldn't find at the library. And so now we have the collection of cinematic portrayals starting off in 1938. Probably should preface that we do have technically the original one is in 1922. That was Douglas Fairbanks when he portrayed it, but then that was in the dark ages of black and white and silent films. So we generally think of this one as being like the OG original that started off the whole Robin Hood portrayals. This is the 1938 portrayal by Errol Flynn. We generally think of the original one. Then we go on to 1952, where Richard Todd, Walt Disney, makes a live-action movie with Richard Todd as the Mantle. Interestingly enough, it seems to be about 20-year gaps in between the movie. Weirdly enough, it kind of has, give or take. So we have 1938, we have 1952. Then we have here, because, I don't really have a DVD that I can interact with right here, so I'm just interacting with the blank, so you can see it, but I can't. This is the, also Walt Disney here. We have the animated movie in 1973, where Brian Bedford takes up, he takes up the voice, really, because, it's an animated movie. Then we have 1991, where we have Kevin Costner taking up his movie there. There's a bit of a gap here because we also happen to have the Mel Brooks Men in Tights movie. That was in 1993, which was kind of focusing more on the comedy aspect, kind of making a spoof of this one in particular, but also the other movies prior to that. But, since that's kind of mostly a riff on this one, we're not going to really talk about it so much. Then we have 2010, where we have Russell Crowe taking up Robin Hood's title there. And then the latest one, as of, recording this, we have Taron Egerton in 2018. So this is sort of like the spectrum that we have right here. And so let's go ahead and talk about each one individually and how they hold up. So we're going to start off with this one here. Let's go ahead and see what we got. The Adventures of Robin Hood, the original 1938 classic. Here we go. So, how does this one hold up? I should begin by saying that each movie, will take liberties, because, they're all inspired by the Robin Hood legends. But, like, we have ballads of different stories, like, Marion was an addition. So, does your story have Marion, or does it not? Does your... And talk about, like, Prince John is your more local, talking about the Sheriff of Nottingham. So each movie will have sort of like its own world building that needs to take place to set up the tone of their movie, which, as kind of like a storyteller, I play Dungeons and Dragons, I'm a big fan of, like, world building, and there are some times where I've created my own world building examples. So I always have a soft spot for when people want to set up the rules of their particular world that they have. I'll just mention that they have a particular movie. I haven't seen it, but it's called Robin and the Seven Hoods. It is a musical that takes place in Chicago as 1920s gangsters. So, that's their particular world that they have set up. It's sort of like Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack, and it's a version of the Robin Hood stories, but I haven't seen it, but, it seems to have, like, somewhat favorable reviews, so I don't know. If you've seen it, let me know. Is it good? I might check it out. So, what world building and what sort of, changes and twists to tell the story that you have right here. This one is seems to be influenced by Sir Walter Scott's influence on the whole Normans versus Saxons. And I will say that probably one of the biggest things that I enjoy as far as like a normal departure, what we generally think of, is the portrayal of Basil Rathbone's character of Sir Guy of Gisborne. Now from what I've read, Howard Pyle, but it's from the records we have, there is a mention of a Sir Guy of Gisborne, but even though he has this name of Sir Guy, which we generally think of as as a knightly title, he is more of a very dark, nefarious, villainous, vile sort of outlaw character. He's a thug mercenary kind of thing, but he happens to have this name of Sir Guy. Again, we don't really have much more background. We just have his encounter with him with Robin. But, I could understand that, like in this particular version, they hear, okay, there's this guy named Sir Guy. We'll make him a knight. I'll make him one of the lords that's ruling over Nottingham, and he's one of the oppressive people, part of the team. And, kind of makes sense. that, you know, like if you want your main rival to like having a dashing swashbuckler, that his rival would also be as physically and athletically inclined as him to hold his own against him. Also, you know, we're in that time frame, you know, like where like, you know, the 1930s, 1940s, where the rival or antagonist is a romantic rival to our main hero. So he kind of has this, you know, charm and ability to have him appeal to Lady Marian that he's trying to win over. So, you know, like it's around that time frame. So, you know, you have that. So he kind of portrays the role that we generally think of as the Sheriff of Nottingham, which is a bit of a departure from what we generally think of, but I think they tastefully handle the dual aspects of what the Sheriff of Nottingham kind of employs. And that on the one hand, the Sheriff, who is generally considered to be the primary villain, at least from general stories in the lore of the books, is that he has the aspect of one, okay, on the one hand, he has a, you know, a character who is, you know, oppressive and making taxes, and he's sinister, but also on the other hand, he's being outwitted every time by Robin Hood, and he's all that, oh, curses, I'll get you next time, you know, that sort of bumbling kind of fool as well. So how do you handle those dual aspects there? And I think they tastefully handled it, like, okay, the sheriff in this version is more of like the oafish kind of lord who doesn't really know how to handle the situation, and really our main rival is Sir Guy of Gisborne, which handles the more of the sinister lordly aspects of it, the handling of men and issuing out warrants and whatnot. So, you know, again, it's a bit of a departure because we generally think of the sheriff as being the primary villain, but you know what? I'm okay with it in this one. I think it's tastefully handled in here. Also, I do want to give a shout out to Alan Hale. I'll give a shout out to like each individual members of the cast kind of in each one that I think needs to be remembered, but Alan Hale plays Little John in this one, and I think he does a fantastic job as being that jolly giant who comes in, and I didn't know this, but in technically the actual original, the Douglas Fairbanks black and white one, Alan Hale actually plays Little John in that version as well, and apparently he was so well liked as portraying that they brought him back again to portray in this one. So, you know, shout out to Alan Hale there. He does fantastic, and I honestly believe it's one of the best portrayals of Little John. So, I think that's enough points about this one. Let's go and talk about the next one, the 1952 version. So let's go check that one there. So, 1952, Story of Robin Hood. Interestingly enough, this is one of my favorite versions of it. Is it my personal favorite of all time? No, we'll probably get to that later, but it holds up very well in my mind because when I read Howard Pyle's depiction of this one, I can see that it is very influenced by particular this one as opposed to, say, Sir Walter Scott's in the 1938 Errol Flynn version. And we have the origin of him actually becoming an outlaw, whereas in Errol Flynn, you know, he's just a lord who like witnesses the oppression of his people and decides, you know, like, I'm going to stand up against you, and the people, you know, Prince John and Guy Gisborne's like, no, you're not, and they kick him out, and like that's, you know, that's about it. In the stories of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle, we have the story of him becoming an outlaw, and we kind of get this one in this one right here. It's a little bit different, but it's kind of close enough that I say, hey, okay, you know, good on you. Good points for that one. In the original story, he is going to an archery tournament, not the archery tournament that we think of, but just a basic tournament to just show off his skill. And he's around 18 or 19 years old. And he goes off, meets some foresters along the way, and they're kind of poking fun of him at his youth and saying, how could you hold up to, you know, some of the great archers of England? And so, kind of riled up by this, he challenges them, these foresters, to like a little archery match. Like, hey, okay, let's set up a target and let's go against what you. Let's care to make a wager on this. You know, short story, though they lose, Robin takes their money, and you know, he's going to continue off to go to the archery tournament. One of the people there who has been, you know, there's been like a little bit of a party, so there's been eating and drinking going on, so a little bit too much ale for this individual. He's a bit mad that about losing the bet, so he pulls out his bow and fires an arrow at Robin Hood. Thankfully, because he has been drinking, his aim is a little bit off, and so it just whizzes right past his ear. Robin Hood, well, you know, Robin Hood, not yet, just Robin, is a bit angry at this, that he's being fired upon from winning, so in his anger, he instinctively grabs an arrow and fires an arrow back, but of course, you know, his aim is good, and it sinks into the guy's chest and kills him. And this psychologically affects Robin Hood, saying like, oh my goodness, in the heat of the moment, I have just now killed a man, and it affects him throughout the story. The only time that he eventually kills someone else, he makes an exception, is for Guy of Gisborne. So, you know, tying back to the Errol Flynn version, you know, like, okay, let's make, you know, Guy of Gisborne a villain, that's the one person that Robin Hood kills. So, you know, good on that one. But we actually kind of have a sort of, you know, interest of this where his father, you know, we have his father, Hugh Fitzooth, so, you know, we're tying on to that there, is standing up for what he believes in. You know, like the sheriff, the sheriff wants Hugh and Robin to join the sheriff's men, and he's like, no, we will not, and kind of ruffles their feathers a little bit. And in the aftermath, Robin Hood's dad is killed in this, and in response, Robin Hood fires back, and he kills the person who did the deed there. So now, you know, again, it's a little bit more self-defense as opposed to, you know, being hot-tempered and making rash decisions and killing him himself. It's like a little bit more justified. I guess they're trying to humanize him a little bit in this version. But, you know, like, I appreciate that they're trying to pay homage to Howard Powell with that, like, oh, the reason he begins as an outlaw is there a death at his hands. So there's that one right there. We also have the story of Marion and Robin being friends from the very beginning. That's kind of like the opening sequence right here, where Robin is trying to practice, but Marion is messing up with the target, trying to fool his aim so he can't hit it, and so he's getting, you know, getting all riled up, and so he's chasing her down. So like they've been like playmates from the very beginning, which kind of ties back again that, you know, like he's mentioned his sweetheart from the beginning, even though there's no real story arc of Robin and Marion, but no, it's mentioned from the beginning that he has a sweetheart named Marion. So I appreciate that. We also have the wonderful addition of Alan a Dale in the story, whereas, you know, most of the stories do not have Alan for some reason, which I think is a great addition because, okay, if we're talking about the ballads of Robin Hood, it would make sense that you would have a minstrel to, you know, sort of be like the narrator to come and, you know, come along and tell the story. So much so that they kind of enjoyed this idea that they took it onto the next, the animated movie that we have, the Rooster being the minstrel, kind of being the narrator telling the story. So why not? I love that. As members of the cast go, I will give a strong recommendation to James Hayter, however you pronounce that last name. He plays Friar Tuck, and I think it's one of the best examples of Friar Tuck because we see him as portrayed in the original, that Robin Hood comes across him and he hears a song being sung. And he hears this weird, it seems like there's two people, like, who's singing together, but he goes up and he sees this one person who's doing two different voices, and he's doing the song back and forth, and it's kind of, this friar is kind of have this, you know, like I'm really a lover more than a fighter type individual, and they play, because, you know, on the whole arc theme of this one, whereas being the idea of love between Robin and Marion from the very beginning, you know, like, it plays in that, you know, Friar Tuck, you know, that he's a bit of a romantic at heart. He kind of plays into that theme of trying to help Robin and Marion come together. So the themes of love, you know, for Marion and Robin, love for one's country, love for his people, you know, the love is a very big, you know, prominent part in this one right here. There is one thing mentioned in the actual record of, you know, Howard Powell's version that is kind of brought about in this one. But I will say I do like the original version best, and that is the incident where the sheriff of Nottingham, who is the principal villain, there's no Guy of Gisborne in here, that the sheriff is in ways of gotten himself into Sherwood Forest and is kind of presented as the guest of honor between the merrymen and their feast that they have there, but, you know, as part of the food and entertainment, he must pay his share, and that's how they get their money and, you know, get their comeuppance on the sheriff. But in this one, it slightly humanizes the sheriff a little bit. The sheriff is hanging more on the villainous aspect on this one, which probably kind of have to if you're doing like a good about it, as focusing on the bumbling aspect of him. But there is a bit of a human aspect to him. First, several couples stood forth at quarterstaff, and so shrewd were they at the game, and so quickly did they give stroke and parry, that the sheriff, who loved to watch all lusty sports of the kind, clapped his hands, forgetting where he was, and crying aloud, well struck, thou fellow with the black beard." And so it kind of gives that point where that, even the Sheriff of Nottingham, in this, being captured by his enemy, Robin, that he's supposed to be hunting down, and among the merry men who he's supposed to hate, that in this time of, merriment, that he kind of forgets where he is. I'm like, yeah, I enjoy this. And so it has that little bit human aspect to him that I kind of love about this one. But, they can't really, in depiction, he kind of had to have a steady theme. He's not really humanized, but I appreciate that they have that aspect where he is brought into the forest. He dines with them, gets to know exactly what Robin is about, and kind of a little bit of a humiliation comes to place as a little, you're trying to oppress us, well, we're going to oppress you in our own sort of ways here. So that's fun, that one there. So that's the Disney live action. Let's go talk about the Disney animated one. Talking about the 1973 Robin Hood here. Thought I'd get up close and personal with you guys because, I don't really have a movie case to interact with. So, it's kind of a quaint animated Disney kids film. So, up close and personal, but not too close. Does this one hold up very well? I think so. It does. For being under 90 minutes long, I think it does a fantastic job of getting the main points that you need for a story. Because the opening sequence, the first few seconds, that Robin Hood and Little John walking through the forest, that part right there, it gets the basic beats. Robin Hood and Little John, they're in Sherwood Forest. They're being hunted by the sheriff, and he escapes. In the first, less than 60 seconds, we've already established that. Now let's begin. We don't need some complicated backstory of how, we don't need to go into how Robin Hood becomes an outlaw, establishing the sheriff and how he gets in there, or Prince John vying for the throne, or if what other people are again, we don't focus on the merry men, so, there's less development of it's just only Robin and Little John, but, as succinct and tight as possible, it gets all that beats across that you need. So I do appreciate that. And the world building that we have in here, because as you know, this takes place in a story of fully anthropomorphic animals. There's no humans involved in all of this. And the world building that they set up, that each animal sort of represents the character that they're supposed to be. We have, Richard the Lionheart, which, we don't see until the very end, but okay, obviously he is a lion. And his brother, being the lesser version of it, is a more mangy lion rather than the more regal lion that we think of. Robin Hood lives in the forest, sly as a fox. Okay, he's a fox. The sheriff is a predator in the forest, so he is a wolf. All of these characters that kind of fit the description of what we generally think of. Wonderful world building that they have. That again, trying to get the villainous aspects kind of lessened because being a kids film, if they were humans, but with animated cartoon animals, we can get away with sort of things right here. And finally, the one that this movie kind of depicts more than pretty much any of the other movies is the sort of comedic aspects are kind of heightened in this version. So which are very true, there is comedy in the jest of Robin Hood and the Howard Pyle's version that, putting on disguises and fooling the sheriff, so it's very true to the original, saying that there has that comedic aspect to it there. I will give a shout out to what I think is probably the best description or depiction of handling the dual aspects of the Sheriff of Nottingham. And specifically, I'm referring to Pat Bertram, that his way of handling the sheriff, of trying to get that, okay, yeah, he's still kind of a villain character, and he's doing things, but in such a comedic and kind of bumbling way that I think it's oddly enough that one of the best portrayals of trying to handle that aspect is in a kids animated movie. So oddly enough, that we have that right there. So that is the 1973 Disney animated movie, and it's getting a little bit sore lying on the ground like this, so I gotta go to a different position talking about Kevin Costner. So let's go talk about that one. Okay, Kevin Costner is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. When people mention having a Robin Hood movie that they either grew up with or watched, for some reason this one seems to be the one that a lot of people at least remember or they're talking about. probably because of the portrayal of the Sheriff of Nottingham by the wonderful Alan Rickman, who, for those of you who don't know, did not want to be a part of this movie until he said, like, okay, listen, if you want me a part of this movie, I get to do whatever the heck I want. And the guys were like, okay, sure, Alan, you can do what you want. And so then he just went full on bombastic, flouncing about the castle, spewing off dialogue, and, it's just really like, you know what? You go, man. You go crazy. And it's just kind of interesting watching him. So I kind of get that. Overall, as a whole, this is not one of my personal favorites. If I were to give it anything, it does everything perfectly fine. Everything is just, does everything that it needs to do, but there's nothing really super spectacular that draws me in, just from my personal sake, that's like, oh, like, this is the Robin Hood for me. And, we'll get into that there. As far as some of the major departures that we have of what we generally think of the Robin Hood story, we open up with Robin Hood in the Holy Lands as a prisoner and trying to escape back to England. So I guess you could say that is a tie-in to the original story that we have, where after the King Richard returns back to England, there is, and even in the Jest of Robin Hood, that, according to Edward, that once the king comes back and he sort of pardons Robin Hood and his merry men, that he joins with the king, kind of being like a royal retainer that he has, or men-at-arms, for about a year and a half. So you could say, oh, okay, so this part, he's joining the king on his crusades as part of this, so somewhat of a tie-in. Maybe as part of a nod or a handshake to that, so okay, like, that works. But, it also, as far as a world-building aspect, it kind of makes sense a little bit. So, like, okay, he left England, behind in his current state right here. He left his father in Locksley Manor, he left Marion behind, and then going off adventures, and when he comes back, he finds that, oh, it's a whole different England I'm coming back to. The sheriff is, taxing and oppressing people, and, what's going on? I've got to stop this and stand up for people. So, as far as a world-building aspect, like, I'm okay with it. That they have this sort of thing that, like, okay, fine, this is the world they want to set up. That part, I'm cool with it. All of the character portrayals in this one are a bit different. And, that's just, sometimes you'll like it or you won't. And there's enough of them that I'm not quite a bit fan of, that's why it's sort of like one on the lower end for me as like part of movies that it's fine. I'll definitely watch it. It's a good movie. But as far as like overall, like when I think of the Robin Hood movie, I think of I don't think of this one per se. So that's just me. The portrayal, specifically the portrayal of Friar Tuck, just in my opinion, a little bit more wild, shall I say, which I guess you could say is closer to the Jest, but of the Jest of Robin Hood. But it's a bit different than what we normally think of. Will Scarlet is Robin Hood's brother in this adaptation. Spoiler. Instead, it's kind of a big reveal in the movie, so sorry. But instead of being his nephew, as it is generally referred to in the written works that we have here. Also, the one thing that I'm kind of okay with is the gentle giant now. So we have the idea of Little John. Portrayal in this is kind of being, in this one he is a father, and he has a wife, and he has a son, and he takes on that more gentle giant aspect, which is kind of a trope that we see or hear of either in like literature or movies, of the big brawny giant, but also has like a big marshmallow kind of inside. So we kind of begin to see the softness of him. I guess it kind of got a little bit of that in the animated movie when you have Little John as a giant bear that you kind of just want to just hug, and just he's so soft and cuddly. But we can see the transition of so he has this caring aspect that he has, that even in future adaptations that you might see, that he has that sort of fatherly aspect. So having his family in the woods, out there, they're all outlaws together. This is one of the adaptations that I will say has a much larger band in the forest, so I do appreciate that. But on overall, it's just kind of it gets the job done. Nothing really spectacular in my opinion. The one character that I do really enjoy, that I should give a shout out, is the character of Azim, which is weird that the only character that I think does fantastic is a totally new made-up character, and that is Morgan Freeman's character of Azim, who is this the dark Saracen who comes from the whole accompanying Robin Hood back to England, which, you know, again, you know, for me personally, I like it seems to be that other people have enjoyed it so much that, you know, you kind of think of it in other portrayals that come, that there is the idea of some sort of like Saracen character that either coming from the beginning or just somehow joins the band of merry men. And, well, of course, you know, it's Morgan Freeman, okay? So, you know, it's probably going to be good. And I love his performance in that one there. But that is pretty much Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And, you know, kind of based on this because, you know, there's enough of things that were weird or, like, didn't click for me that, you know, I won't really talk much about the Mel Brooks Men in Tights. That kind of rips mostly on this, but other movies previously. But that, you know, like, it makes it like, hey, you know, like, so this decision that, you know, they're like, why was that, you know, and they kind of reference to that, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, that is a good show. They go, why was that in that one there, right? So, you know, like, so there are definitely, like, in my opinion, a couple of problems that, you know, on the whole, you know, I can kind of gloss over and enjoy it as it is, but, oh, yes, one thing before we go from here, interestingly enough, we have sort of like a witch that kind of foresees certain elements of the future. So we don't really have like full-on like magic users or we're going into full fantasy per se, but it kind of makes it interesting, like, okay, in whatever world building that you choose to do, you know, like, it kind of works in this is basically, you know, just basically some sort of like soothsayer able to foresee the future. So there's no real magic, but, you know, it kind of raises the question, like, could you do like a Robin Hood set in the typical high medieval fantasy that we generally think of? Like, are there dragons or giants or wizards in this universe? You know, like, it's quite possible. So, like, it kind of sparks your imagination of like what it could be there. But, you know, that's pretty much Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and also, you know, Men in Tights, you know, part of the kind of spoof of this one. And that kind of ends most of the fancy Robin Hood naming titles, because the next movies are just called Robin Hood. But let's go talk about that one. All right. So, Robin Hood with Russell Crowe. The reason I'm in front of my bookshelves right here and the historical knowledge that we have here is because the director, Ridley Scott, if you're not familiar with sort of his sort of works, that he takes a very more grounded historical approach to the movies that he tries to do. And, you know, for that, I do appreciate it. Being as kind of a historian, I do love the certain aspect of like, oh, okay, so these are actually grounded in actual historical events. These places and people actually existed. So there's aspect of that. The world building that sort of takes place in this one, you know, more grounded, tries to be on the return of Richard. They say in the movie it's from the Crusades, and that's when he actually dies. But, you know, in the historical context, he wasn't on a crusade at that time. He was just dealing with some sort of French rebellion that was going on right there. But he was in France, and he just happens to die, although accurately portrayed in that movie. There is a battle, and King Richard takes a crossbow bolt to the shoulder, and, you know, in this one, he sort of, like, dies instantaneously, but, you know, actually he gets shot. But, you know, they remove the bolt, it becomes infected, and, you know, he eventually dies. But, you know, so, okay, accuracy, good. Love that. And so the idea of, like, okay, so now King Richard is dead. I guess Prince John is now King John, and we begin to see, like, okay, now we're going to see what the kingdom is going to be like under John. And I will say, of the portrayals, I do love Oscar Isaac's portrayal, you know, fantastic actor of Prince and King John, where they portray the sort of historical aspect very well, that he is kind of a spoiled prince and doesn't really know how to rule a kingdom very well, which is actually quite true to what the actual historical documents that we have. And we know his nickname, as opposed to his brother, Richard the Lion Heart, you know, very strong, capable combat leader. We have John Lackland, you know, who was unable to kind of hold on to the land. Specifically, I think it was in Ireland, when he was supposed to be gifted land that he wasn't able to hold on to it. So his ability to control a kingdom, you know, kind of not very well, lackluster, shall we say. So I do give a shout out to that portrayal there. Also, Mark Strong, who plays our primary villain, because Prince John and King John is just more of like an incompetent role. He's not really like a main villain per se. Like he's just kind of like a spoiled kid who's trying to be better, but by the end of the movie, so spoiler, doesn't really succeed. But our primary villain is a play on Sir Guy of Gisborne, played by Mark Strong. His name is Sir Godfrey, and okay, close enough. And as far as like the more grounded, realistic versions of a villainous character, I have to say Mark Strong does like a fantastic job of this one. I really enjoy it. And also, I won't spoil the ending for you, but the way that good wins in the end. I will say that hang on you, but the way Sir Godfrey is defeated happens to be what happens in the original jest of Robin Hood. So I'm like, oh yes, that is mentioned. That is how the originally the Sheriff of Nottingham is taken down. So hey, good on you. So again, there's a lot of true historical aspects of this that I enjoy, but there is a thing that when you kind of try to make it more grounded in reality, there is this fine line that you kind of cross. I'm like, okay, but there is a sort of sign of ethereal, fantastic wonder that surrounds like the tales of Robin Hood, and when you try and bring it more down to realistic, you kind of lose a little bit of the fantastic qualities that we generally think of. So again, will it fit everyone? This one kind of gets mixed reviews. I'm the one that kind of sees the glass half full on this one for me. I kind of enjoy this one. That's kind of why I own it on Blu-ray right there. So, but that's just me. So that is Robin Hood, the 2010 version by Russell Crowe. We have one last one, and we'll go talk about that one. So here we go. And finally, in our final lineup up here, we got the 2018 film. So again, simply titled just Robin Hood. Has Taron Egerton as the lead role of Robin Hood here. And this one is very interesting. When you put it in the DVD to go ahead and watch it, the opening sequence kind of lets you know ahead of time it's going to be a very different portrayal. It even tells you, hey, this is not the story that you think you know. Forget everything that you've been told or what you think you know. Like, this is the story of Robin Hood. And so it goes to show you what they want to portray. And I'm a bit conflicted because on the one hand, my world building aspect, my brain part loves that. I'm like, okay, you know what? You want to tell your story of what Robin Hood is like? Okay, you know what? I'm down. What have you got to tell? Because, as I mentioned, they have stories of Robin Hood being set in Chicago during the 1920s. So I'm like, okay, you want to set this world? Okay, you know what? I'm here for the journey. What have you got? But then, on, some of the aspects, I kind of like, like the old typical classics, the general story. Can we stick to that? So, a bit conflicted. But, okay, we're going to go see what this world is like. And this is more of a stylized action superhero origin tale. Because, again, kind of like on the Russell Crowe version, is more of the origin of how Robin Hood got started rather than the actual Robin Hood tale. And it kind of opens with Marion, actually, who kind of actually plays more of a pivotal role, kind of is more of the axis of how things move along in the story. I mean, it centers around Robin Hood, but kind of certain action beats are kind of brought about by Marion. The opening sequence has Marion as a thief stealing a horse from this lord because her neighbors or whatever horse died, so they can't plow their fields. Turns out that this lord she's stealing from is Robin of Locksley. And so okay, this is a bit of a departure than what we think of, what we think of Lady Marian, but okay, this is their world building they want to get into. Maybe it'll end, maybe it won't. Robin is currently drafted into going to the Crusade, so it's not really wanting to take up the cross to go join King Richard. It's more like he kind of doesn't really want to go on that one, so okay, that's a bit of a departure there. And while in the Crusades, we have this nice, spectacular opening sequence where we have the Saracens laying down fire with their repeating crossbows, and they're just firing into the walls, and debris is shooting everywhere, and we have Robin dodging arrows and flinging arrows in epic slow-mo, And so I'm like, okay, you could, yeah, like this is what they're focusing on, more of the action hero part of it. He eventually goes back to England, where with Little John, who is actually a Saracen in this one, so kind of focusing on some of the aspects of this one, you know, where they have like a sort of a Saracen character that accompanies with him, whereas this one is like a totally new character, accompanied with some of the classic tales we have. This one, actually, Little John himself becomes basically a Saracen in this version here. So been a little bit of a departure. You can see how much we're kind of stretching the story here. While he was away on the Crusades, you know, apparently read from the roster of the dead, it was apparently that he had died 2 years ago, apparently. So people think he's dead, and one of those is Marion, who this time, okay, it's been 2 years, so in the world building aspect of this one, she has now formed a relationship with a certain Will Scarlet, kind of engaged with him now. And so my world building brain says, okay, you know, in this circumstances, if, you know, the person that you thought that you would like to be with, you know, has gone to war and from as far as you know has died, how do you move on? Do you find someone else? Well, like, okay, I could possibly believe that. But also, you know, I'm thinking of the Robin Hood stories, and I'm like, okay, no, Marion should be with Robin. You know, that's what we generally think of. So you can see a bit of these, you know, world-building stretches that they have taken on this one, which, on the whole, right here, I will have to say it's I would describe this as the 3 Fs. It is flashy, it's fun, and yet forgettable. And I think that is kind of like the greatest sin of this one right here, because generally what we think of Robin Hood is being timeless. He's a legend, a classic. He's just memorable, and I definitely enjoyed this one. You know, maybe it's just because of my world building brain right here, but it was a good popcorn type movie that you can plug in and, you know, watch for 2 hours. But then, you know, you wake up the next morning and you kind of move on to like whatever's next, you know. So like that, I think, is some of the greatest sin of this one, is that it kind of can be forgettable by focusing on some of the other aspects. Like, again, there is some cool action. Like, okay, we know from the story that Robin Hood is a great archer and he can do some incredible stuff. Well, let's focus on that. And I think that you focus too much on the wrong thing. And, you know, because, you know, there are certain aspects that I particularly like. Taron Egerton as Robin Hood kind of brings that youthful, you know, and British humor energy that he belongs with them. Jamie Foxx, who plays Little John, I think did fantastic. Pretty much anything that he's done, he excels in. And I do have to say, Ben Mendelsohn, phenomenal actor. Pretty much anything he's in is great. Great as the villainous Sheriff of Nottingham. So, you know, there are little elements of like, okay, portrayals, and, you know, certain aspects of the world building, you know, of certain designs or characters, the aesthetic is, that I do enjoy. But overall, as a whole, I think it kind of misses the mark a little bit. I mean, but, you know, as I said, it's a fun movie that you can plug in, but ultimately forgettable. Like, say, Friar Tuck. Why does he have, you know, long hair? You know, when we generally think of Friar Tuck as, you know, having like the bald on top and having like, you know, the typical friar ring around, that's generally what we think of. Why is everyone sort of in more like modern-ish clothing, per se? Again, it's consistent, and so that's not one thing that, okay, we've set up this one and all of a sudden you add this and like it jars with this one, but no, it's fully consistent. So, you know, there's that, but it's this world building, something that is like, okay, it's a medieval setting, but also somewhat modern. So, like, how does that work, per se? So, you know, overall, I definitely enjoyed it, but ultimately it's kind of forgettable, and not really much left to talk about that one. I do want to speculate of when the next movie is coming out, because, you know, of our timeline that we have, you know, about 20 years. This one came out in 2018. So, if we're going to say somewhere between 2030 and 2040, somewhere in that time frame, we'll probably get another Robin Hood, if my, you know, hypothesis is correct. I'm going to speculate and make a guess. 2036. We'll go with that. That's going to be the timeline when I think of the next Robin Hood is going to come out here. We'll see. We'll hold on to that to see if that holds up. And if another Robin Hood movie comes out, will it be good? Will it be bad? I don't know. If it is bad, hey, don't worry, you don't have to worry, but because 2 years later, in 2038, will be the 100th anniversary of this movie, and you best believe that there's going to probably be a special edition Blu-ray coming out of this one that I am 100% going to buy, because, spoiler, this one is my favorite. Out of all the movies that we have, there we go, of all the movies that we have right here, this one is my personal favorite. I will go ahead and make a special mention because it is a cinematic portrayal of Robin Hood, but it is not in movie format. And that is specifically the BBC TV series. Has 3 seasons from 2006 to 2009. So it's kind of in between these two movies right here. And it kind of fits in that particular what we generally think of the stories, that we have these small collection of tales, these collection of ballads of stories. Like, okay, this is the part. Okay, so this is the part where the Robin Hood meets the Tinker. This is the story where Little John goes to the fair. This is the part where Robin Hood and meets Will Scarlet. This is where Robin Hood turns beggar and the adventures that he has. This is Robin Hood meeting Sir Guy of Gisborne. And so you could probably say like, oh, okay, instead of trying to tell an overall, general 2-hour story as a movie, well then why don't we say like, okay, this is like a 30, maybe 45 hour, depending on, what series program they have, that this is this particular episode, and it ends and stay tuned next time for next episode. We're going to do this adventure arc. And the BBC portrayal, I mean, if you're going to tell the story of a British legend, might as well have the BBC take hold of it right there. And there's a lot of shows from the BBC that I have really enjoyed, and I will recommend it very well. If you're in for a more longer ride, per se, instead of having just like a movie that you can pop in and you want to stay tuned for more and more coming in, I do recommend it. Oddly enough, it took me a little bit of time to get used to Jonas Armstrong, who portrays the role of Robin Hood. It was a bit of a different portrayal than I was used to. But, as the show progressed and I saw him, like, okay, you know what? I got hooked on him. He was good. Gordon Kennedy, who plays Little John, is kind of up here with Alan Hale. And this one is like, he is one of my best portrayals of Little John. We have the actual portrayal of Much, he kind of takes on the role of the sidekick from the Crusades. Not Saracen, he was originally followed Robin Hood to the Crusades, and he followed him back, and he's the loyal companion who takes care of him. Kind of a Samwise Gamgee kind of type character who's always looking out for Mr. Frodo, looking out for Mr. Robin Hood there. I will say, as far as the character of Will Scarlet goes, I think the BBC has that one out of all of these ones here, played by Harry Lloyd. You might know him from Game of Thrones, for those of you who have seen him in that one there. But yeah, Harry Lloyd, I really love his portrayal of Robin Hood. Alan Adale is a bit one of the things that he's more of a thief, cut purse in it for the money, rather than the quarter of rollicking minstrel that we have. So that's, a bit of a departure. But we have that one right there. And I have to say, as far as the character of Marion goes, I do not have a single problem with either one of these. All of these ones are fantastic. Marion across the board is fantastic. But Lucy Griffiths has made Marion in the BBC, I think, takes the cake. She is can hold her own with her wit with Robin Hood, because, she got left behind. She was left when he went off to join the Crusades, when he came back, and so she's kind of a bit resentful for leaving her. But also she still kind of loves him and holds on to that love, but so she wants to get back with him. But she's also in the castle, so she's getting information from the sheriff and Sir Guy of Gisborne. So she's trying to relay information back to Robin Hood and try to do her own thing, trying to help the people. And it's good. I highly recommend this show. It's really good. But as far as movies go, this one I believe takes the cake. And okay, hold on. We've got to talk about this, because this movie does the one thing that none of the other movies do, and it actually ties with an actual historical event that takes place. I'm so excited. Okay, so this one, the idea of King Richard coming back is sort of kind of like the catalyst of so Robin can stop being Robin Hood. So I'm like, okay, Robin Hood is stealing from the rich to give to the poor. When does that stop? Okay, well, in some cases, it's when when we defeat the Sheriff of Nottingham, whether he's being killed or he's opposed or whatever. But then of course you have the idea of okay, if Prince John is in the portrayal, like he can just install a new one or whatever. Or how do you get rid of Prince John and his kind of over the overall of England? Well, once you get King Richard, then the kingdom can be restored. Robin Hood can stop being the kingdom's all right, happy ending all around. This one ties in with the whole King Richard secretly returning to Sherwood Forest. This one and this one, per se, has the actual most climactic ending to have that being part of the story. They do have it in these ones as well, but it actually is kind of downplayed a little bit, which was kind of a little bit sad that was it seems like it should be more uplifting, the king is here, which these ones have the best one. But this one even goes further than that, and that is that the historical event in 1194, when King Richard was set free from the Holy Roman Empire, and the ransom has come back to collect the ransom, and so he's being sent back to England. John, who is actually in France at this time with Philip trying to work things out, sends word to certain lords, so hey, hold the castles for me. Do not let Richard take control of these. And when Richard finally lands on March 12th, I think it was. If that's wrong, there'll be a big, correction on either side of me here. But I think on March 12th, he arrives in England, and one of the first things he does is he goes to London, shows himself, and hey, I'm the king. What's the state of the throne? Let's get things better. I hear my brother is doing stuff. How do we fix it? One of the first things he does is to go to the castles that have been supposedly held for Prince John and make sure to prove himself that he is the rightful king. The first castle that he goes to is Nottingham Castle. And I just love that. And in the historical aspects, that the people who are in the castle being hold up, wanting to hold the castle, have not received word that King Richard has returned home. For as far as they know, King Richard was still a prisoner. All of a sudden, wait, he's here in England? What's going on? And so they think it's kind of a ruse to trick them. So again, not really on their fault per se, but they actually hold the castle in the name of John because they think it's a trick. And after the siege lasts for 3 days, and it's about that time when they finally just okay, maybe we should rethink this. They get some of the people in the castle who are acquainted with the royal court to go out with the white flag and say okay, listen, hey, let's talk. And they see King Richard and okay, if they can verify that's actually King Richard, hey guys, he's the real deal. And then they surrender. And so they play on that in this one, is that King Richard goes to the forest, the old secret, reveals himself to Robin Hood. But that's not just the only thing. It's in this one, Prince John is under the assumption that, hey, King Richard, has not returned. He's still in Austria. For all we know, he is dead. I mean, I might as well be crowned king here, because, I've just been ruling the region. I think I deserve to be the title. And so Robin Hood and his men, along with the king, which is hey, we've got to stop this. This is happening just tomorrow down the road in the castle. And so they have to sort of besiege the castle to go and make sure and stop that. But then also tying it back with Robin Hood's sort of wits of getting things done and say, hey, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's supposed to be performing the ceremony, let's go over and sneak over to his place that's a little bit more easily able to get hold of us than the actual castle. We'll sneak into there and pretend to be monks on the trail for the coronation. That's how we can sneak into the castle, and that's how they win by having the battle in there. So I love that particular aspect. So the culmination of as being as true to the tales right here, and true to some historical events with, some liberties taken in place, but overall, fantastic. It's amazing that this one, the kind of first ones, has held up all this time, that people think of this is the quintessential Robin Hood movie. And, it just goes to show that when you have a written, the lore written of a well-written book, the lore of a certain character and time frame and events, that when you translate it to film, that when you hold on to that and try to do the best adaptation of that it can hold up. Because, you know, when you have, like, say, a book that is, like, beloved and regarded by people, and it's been held captive, and they want to hear stories of that, and somebody wants to take a movie adaptation or some sort of cinematic portrayal of it, you want that to be as truthful or as faithful as possible with, you know, given some liberties, but as long as it's faithful to the core of the story, it should be good. We want to witness that, and, you know, when things don't happen like that, then, you know, people might get upset about that and want to let people know, like, hey, what happened here? In case you weren't aware, this is sort of like a transition into a topic that is going to be the Rings of Power that has just come out, because we just had the season finale of season 1 of the Amazon's Rings of Power, and that's kind of where I feel that we've kind of been violated because of that. That'll be a separate video. We finished up our Robin Hood series right here. I do have one more Ranger video in the making, sort of about the kind of Ranger outpost. But, you know, I think that might have to wait, because I think I need to talk about the Rings of Power and travesty of that one there. So whether it's the Rings of Power, or whether it's more Ranger video, or other videos that I have coming up, keep a watchful eye.